All right, this is our 18th interview, this time with Vid. I'm kind of amused by the timing of this one because I just recorded a series re ranking the top 60 tournament triple triad players. And Vid was one of the surprises of the series. I adjusted my methodology a bit, and he just kept, no matter what I did, coming out really well. And when I went to a purely numeric system, his just really consistently high scores across the board put him up to 12th all time in my most recent ranking. And I think deservedly so. So it was kind of wild that like 3 days after I record the video saying, Vid is number 12 tournament player all time, he returns from the ether, and I immediately bothered him to do this interview, and he very graciously responded almost immediately with his answers. So I'm pretty excited about that. He's also someone who, as I started doing these historical projects, I kind of felt it was a shame Vid wasn't around for them, because he was someone else who had interest in kind of putting it all together. He kept a records of all the icons, and I've used that for various projects of mine, and had various articles talking about the strengths of different players, and I thought interesting descriptions there. So he was just someone who I had wanted to kind of bounce the sort of historical and analytic work I've done off, and I'm really glad to have him back. So it all felt very nicely timed, and let's get to the interview. How would you describe your triple triad player style? I never really gave it any thought, but from what I heard from others, my playstyle is a bit more defensive and not daring or offensive enough. After having been told this, I have paid a bit more attention to my style, and I guess it describes my style well. I will often take the safe and easier way to a tie. I am neither very creative in the moves that I play, nor in the hands that I create. Here's kind of my hot take about triple triad. I was saying this to turds a while ago, like, play more boring. Force yourself to make more boring moves. We have creative ideas, and some of them are good, and for most of us, we want to cut like between 20 and 50% of our creative ideas, I think. And I really think this applies to a lot of players, where you look at the games they go wrong, and now of course I have the solver to aid with that. And a lot of the time it's when they tried to do something creative. And of course there are players that are capable of more consistent creativity. I think Delial, Seto, Akiyama are very obvious examples there. And I also think there are players where some of the directions they go creative are good and some are not as good, right? And also there's just moves that seem creative to one player will not seem creative to another, right? We all have kind of different conceptions of what standard moves are, and lots of different moves are viable in this game. So this is not to say that if you have a somewhat different style than others, that's wrong. But I do think taking safe ways to a tie minimizes errors, and tournaments are largely about minimizing errors. And avoiding creativity is a genuine skill. So I do not think this is the description of a player who's not finding concepts, right? Who is your most interesting opponent? Out of the box players used to create the most interesting matches. The first to come to mind would be someone like Soujiro. Through the different eras, there have been a lot of different players that should be named here, such as Sir Smoke or Piggyman for excellent creative handmaking, but also their inconsistency, much like myself as well. There could be absolute top-tier matches flowing with energy and blowing your mind, and a game later it would be extremely boring or just craptastic quality-wise. Love hearing shoutouts for Soujiro. He's always, been a player that interested me a lot and does seem to come up rather a lot in my videos, whether or not he has relevance to them. I was doing a recent thing using solver analysis to look at the tournament games we've had in the return, and Sir Smokes is the player who creates the most dynamic positions of anyone. His rate of getting into positions where he's winning is absurdly high. His rate of getting into positions where he's losing is high as well relative to players of his strength. He is just this very for a player I've often thought of as kind of very good at defensive standard moves, that was completely wrong. He plays incredibly imbalanced games. I remember He had a game in Clan League where he was in a must-win spot against Crescent, I think, who's been just generally super impressive and had a great half of Clan League. And Sir Smokes went, "Oh, I have to win," and immediately went for a 1-2-6 position, just immediately complicating the game massively, and ended up winning that one. Who is your toughest opponent? Great Sephiroth immediately comes to mind. For me, this guy was absolutely unbeatable, and sort of detestable in his entire actions, beginning with the way he would use a space after punctuation. There would be times when I would play and tie 5 times and he would log off because he got, quote, bored. He would maximum change his hand 1 time and still give me a beating, even whilst trying to counter his hand as best as possible. A day later, he would beat me with the same hand, having suddenly changed his playing style completely, as if he had adapted to my style overnight. One time, he majorly pissed me off. The game was seemingly going well for me after 3 or 4 cards played. To me, it seemed like a very confusing game scenario as of now. He did time out. Without me commenting it, he would just mention, "You won," and log off. I wondered to myself, how? How could he within this time frame have figured out that I had won? I had not even seen the win myself, and despite having attempted to analyze the game for various hours later, I could still not certainly say that I had won it for sure. It became clear to me that this guy was so out of my league, a league that I would likely never reach, and it is the league to which a couple of players we all know belong to. I never talked much to Great Sephiroth, so I didn't have a feel for him, except that he was certainly very succinct. Like, just, play a few games, bored, gone. Yeah, that certainly gives rude feeling, but also I think is amusing. Good story. I like this one. What formation or move type do you like more than other players do? I don't even know what formation other players may or may not like, haha. I guess after all, I do like Z or Tilted Z, even after realizing that formation is absolute garbage. It's not absolute garbage. I do also really like a C type, but that probably comes from my defensive type. Now, I should have asked what was meant by a C. I tend to think of it as an L, so say cards in 1, 2, 3, 4, where this first turn player goes in 6, which if the cards were in 1, 2, 4, 7, and 8 would look like a C. That's what I tend to assume that means. That's what I've used it to mean, but I have learned as doing these interviews that what I mean by a formation or how I describe a move type is often very different from how others do. We're going to see an example of that in a bit. I think the C is pretty interesting. It's surprisingly... It depends on what L formation how you got to the L formation, right? How the cards landed in 1, 2, 3, and 4 for when you're going in 6. But when there's not a threat in 5, and sometimes when there is, but definitely when there's not, I think on average 6, the C type is the best formation there, but I don't know if that's what Vid's referring to, and if I was a competent interviewer, I'd have checked on that. Instead, I just send a questionnaire and then read it. This can be for open or closed, or answer for both. What formation or move type do you like less than other players do? T drives me nuts, can barely deal with it, and I'm shit at setting it up. Might be related to my hand making though, but from my experience, even in closed or random, it's deadly to me. Is it perhaps connected to the order or way that I play cards? Trying to keep a balance in the hand at all times, and evading, if possible, one-sided hands. Like the power numbers mostly turn left. I think that's interesting. Someone in a recent interview, I feel like it must have been Smokes, but it could have been someone else, said they really don't like the T formation because it relies very similarly on heavily having value left in, the direction the top of the T is, right? So if the T is 1, 2, 3, 5, and 8, having power facing up is just immensely valuable in the T structure, and ideally, or quite often, you want both your cards to have high power facing up left. And he just doesn't build hands or run out the cards in his hand in a way that leaves him well set up to play a T, and doesn't like holding on to cards that are that singular in purpose. And interesting that both Vid and Smokes, I think it was Smokes, really uncomfortable with the T here. After having answered a few more questions, another scenario came to my mind. It is not the most likely of events, but I do not like safe corner starters. Basically, your corner will be safe from direct impact as well as a center counter. I always felt that it may give you safety at the beginning, but afterward it often cripples you, as you somewhat give the momentum to the opponent. You're either forced to stay on the defensive for the entire game, hi, tie, or you'll be lured into going on attack, which may just be wanted, and later on, worst case, making you yourself having to play a move that will make your originally safe corner vulnerable. So overall, complete waste, and that's my opinion as a defensive player. Two thoughts on safe corner starters. One is story I just tell constantly. I remember watching Deli play a low-level game, and he had a 5-5 corner, and it was completely safe. There was never anything from the opponent's hand that could ever be set up against it, right? None of their cards could ever combine to set up against it, and even Deli's cards, he'd have to play incredibly strangely to ever give them like one possible threat against the starter. And I just assumed he'd play it in 7. It was a safe corner for 7. And he thinks for all of his time, let's say it was a 5-minute game, as Deli is wont to do, and with 20 seconds left on the clock, makes a move in 3. Just very much saying, this card is going to be great no matter what, but I don't need to waste it as a powerful starter. It's going to dominate at any point in the game. It can take anything, and I would rather have it dominating the remaining space than kind of cash out immediately for just one safe card. And he went on to win that game very easily. The other thought that came to mind is, and this may not be directly relevant, but often safe corners, because they have such high power facing out, they're likely to have high power facing out to be safe, are susceptible to setups where they're hard to play next to, where you suddenly lose ability to play in some squares because it's hard for you to go next to them without being really susceptible to combos. And I don't think that's quite where Vid's going here, but I do think some kinds of strong corners are really overrated, and what you should really look for in a strong corner is not purely safety, but kind of, will my opponent have combo potential play off it? Because if they won't, even if they can, take it some ways, it's going to be difficult for them to make threats around. And so just simply numbers facing out that aren't numbers their hands combine well with often make it a better starter than purely can they capture it at all. Favorite way to meet a corner starter, a side starter, a center starter. I adore answering a corner starter with an adjacent corner. I'm very horrible at this type of setup. However, if by chance I happen to find a strong move, it usually turns the game. I think of people who have done interviews, Turd so far has been the biggest fan of the adjacent corner, now joined by Vid. Otherwise, I enjoy playing right next to the corner, or opposite center. For instance, meeting a corner in 9 with a move in 4. You see, so he describes meeting at 9 with a move in 4 as opposite center. I would describe that as far side, right? We all have our own terminologies. It is really interesting we exist in this world that has, this tight, small community, though it used to, of course, be much larger. But the terminologies never kind of settled. We all have our own different descriptions. And I like that even though I've been making these videos and I very much say it how I think of things, I hear people, obviously Vid hasn't been watching my videos, but I still hear lots of people just describing things very differently than how I do. And in some moments, I wish it was a little more homogenized so I knew exactly what people meant. But I also just like that we all have our own structures of how the game works in our head. And it's not just that we use different terminology for things. It really, I think, combines with different understandings, and simply describing things differently leads to seeing things in different ways. And, here, this is not a very strong example, but I really do like seeing the different ways people internalize concepts about the game. Regarding center starters, I find going in a corner to be pretty strong. With everything else, you lose momentum and give your opponent the chance to direct the game. I think I tend to like also meeting center starters with corners replies. I think hands that are overweighted side to side or up down are usually best punished by a move in a side score. So if the hand starts in 5 and is really good up down, then going in 4 or 6 can make the game really uncomfortable for them. And I remember, for instance, in the quarterfinal, the excellent match between Piggyman and Slash of Time, one of the critical games Piggyman won was he had a really side-to-side hand, and Slash started in 5, and Piggyman played in 6, guaranteeing the game would be heavily side-to-side. So I think corners give you more kind of power, but side replies to center starters often give you more control of not whether the game's left or right or up or down, but whether the game is left and right or up and down. And for me, that's where side starters have the most power and where I tend to look for them the most. Side starters I consider to be rather crappy. From the above mentioned, it can be good to go middle or attack directly. I also am pretty low on side starters. I've been doing anti-side starter propaganda. I think there are some really good examples of them being strong, but it almost entirely, I think, happens on split level sets. Again, I was going through tournament records, and I was looking at Seto games, and Seto is obviously one of, if not the best player ever, as well as just a phenomenal, frequent user of side starters. But I noticed something interesting was on the split level sets, and I have other videos where I'm going to talk about how I think side starters make more sense in split level sets that were actually before I was looking at this, but this really was one of those things of, oh, I'm expecting to see this, and I in fact do, so it seems really notable. But his side starters were a lot more effective in split level sets than they were in mono level or close to mono level sets. I thought that was interesting. I tend to be low on side starters too. I also like attacking them directly, but I think it is interesting Vid mentions going in the middle. There have been a couple players, I'm not remembering who now, that like to reply to side starters with moves in 5. Because he came up earlier in the interview. One of the very few games I captured of Great Sephiroth early in the return, that was a game Deli and I had really a lot of fun analyzing together as it was played. Great Sephiroth met a starter in 2, just capturing it from 5. And both of us thought this was an immensely strange move, given a whole bunch of combo factors, and it led to this absurdly complex game that was really fun to watch. But I don't have a good feel for where people see options to go in 5 against side starters, and I hope to catch some games of Vids doing this at some point, because I'm curious about this move type. It is not really part of how I think about meeting side starters. I can only think of one game where I seriously considered it, and it was where I expected my opponent to play it and thought it didn't work. And my opponent did play it, and it indeed did not work. Do you have a preferred starter type? In closed or random, I will go center, because I am lazy. Otherwise, I like corner, either defensive corner, or playing a weak corner or bait corner. I like to think of center starters in closed as better than pure laziness, but yeah, it lets the questions be delayed a turn. Does that change between random and hand games? I guess I've already answered this to an extent. It will for sure depend on random or hand, especially mentioning my above thing to force balance on the board and in my own hand. My own hand will always have a very similar pattern, unless I have a genius idea or the steps don't allow my type of hand, so that will reflect on my play type. Random entirely destroys this though, even more so depending on open or closed. I have thought a bit about really seeing players focus really on specific types of hands and just getting a ton of familiarity with this is a type of hand I know is viable. I sort of made some cases for this for 3-corner hands in some of my early videos. But yeah, I do think it's interesting because this is kind of the concept of having balance in your hand being combined with disliking T structures. How do you spend time during the opponent's move? Thinking about specific lines, thinking about general things, or spacing out? I absolutely do not think about the game anymore. I have a small attention span, and I get exhausted or drained quickly, so I need to conserve my energy. From my experience, I can absolutely not foresee another player's move. Stupidly enough, I would start thinking about their bad moves and how I would turn the game into a win from then on, which of course they won't play. So effectively, I'm wasting my resources. I did this for a while, after realizing how pointless and stupid this is, but even after actively trying to counter it, I seem to have a blindness for their good moves. This is only the case for my inactive turn, not my active turns. So yep, relaxing and chatting to someone it is. Often I would just chat with Yojimbo and have him insult my stupidity, but not actually talk about the game until it was over. Yeah, I really empathize with this. I think thinking hard during your turn and then trying to continue it up at any level during the other player's turn. Again, like there are players who do this very well, but for me, it's really a time to maybe think about some general things, not like specifically looking at lines, nothing that kind of requires exhaustion, but kind of vaguely, oh, those numbers might potentially line up in some conceivable universe. That could be cute. And just like seeing potentials for little pluses or plus walls or just things that aren't that relevant to the position but might potentially be useful to keep in mind. Like, oh, if that card lands in 5 and that card lands in 7 miles away from the action, which has been in like 2 and 3, that would set up some cute stuff. But I really think the, not for everyone, but for a lot of us, giving your brain a rest during the opponent's turn is a really valuable thing to consider. And if you have someone to just chat with and have it be something else, I think that's really helpful. Maybe I'm referencing the Smokes interview too much because that's the last one I did, but he said like he likes to like go do push-ups or something, right? Work out, do something that is effortful in a very different way and lets him recharge. Now, I'm not sure being insulted is the best way to do this, but still. What is your proudest triple triad moment? As a rather new player, I would finally beat Kamikaze, not 100% sure on this, for my tryout for Zodiac Braves. Sort of the same with Trance Knights. I had attempted it like 17, 32, God knows how many times. I was probably the longest active non-member member this clan ever had. I insisted to play the stronger players though, such as Scythe, instead of a weaker recruiter. As always, I think it's great when people's memories are clans and communities they were part of and kind of finally earning your place in it through, you know, continued trial and finally doing what felt impossible at the start. As for later on, I have 2 proud memories. One is a game against Chickeny in Clan League or Clan Wars, not sure. I don't even remember who I was playing for, lol. I can unfortunately not explain the details to why I am proud of this, as it didn't quite include fair play by the other clan, although not directly breaking the rules, but it was stunning, especially as it turned out to be a decisive game. An underdog from the other team had beaten a top tier from ours, which we did not calculate coming. I'm gonna guess Vid was playing for Paradigm Shift. Maybe Elite Four though. Well, that's my guess. Yeah, there are a few usually not quite included in interviews, but there have been a few people who've sort of mentioned in passing around doing the interviews, like, hey, there was this clan event that did not feel above board at some point. But yeah. And then there is, of course, my amazing series of games against Nightwish. Again, don't remember what for, but I assume it was Essie and Anaki. I'm gonna bring up the shrine and go check out Nanaki because I think, you know, we're celebrating Vid here, and Vid has 2 tournament victories. He came back, I think, around mid-2010. He was not there when I started in 2008, had made like a semifinals, disappeared for a long time, came back and started racking up semifinals as well as winning 2 tournaments. And we're in the proudest moments section, so I feel okay interrupting him to talk about 2 of his best runs. Garland was the first closed tournament the site had, and it was also the only double elimination tournament the site ever had. And Vid beat Vlad Xard in the first round, Darkside, who I believe is Dorf, in the second round, Nightwish in the 3rd round, Delial in the 4th round, Cliff in the 5th round, real giant killer Cliff. He took out D, Diaconantite. beat Broccoli in the winners finals, and then lost to Rayaminator in the finals to set up a grand finals against Rayaminator, because Rayaminator had come out of losers bracket, which Vid beat him in to take the title. And then in Nanaki, Vid gets an activity win against FF Player, beats, I think, longtime friend Yoshikin, then beats Piggyman, then beats D, who had knocked out Yojimbo, was really the Yojimbo killer of the era, in the quarterfinals. In the semifinals, beats Kamikaze, that coming back, and in the finals takes out Nightwish. I think Vid did play Nightwish maybe a couple other times. Nightwish had beaten me in this tournament. Really nice tournament win. I forget where I ranked in my all-time tournament ranks, but clearly a very good tournament win. And let's assume it was for that. And returning to the match against Nightwish, so returning to quoting Vid here, for me at least, they were amazing. The feedback I got from the viewers was different. Most of the games were horribly boring and frustrating, mostly due to my defensive style, not taking the win earlier. Most games were sure ties from very early on. The final game, however, was supposedly very intense and likely one of my best plays ever. It made me proud when Seto congratulated me for obliterating Nightwish in that game. Possibly after having worn him out after all these boring ties. Who knows? Again, the goal of tournaments is to not lose. Boring ties against a top-tier player is, I think, a very good result. Incidentally, in my rankings, Vid was one of the surprises, but Nightwish also landed higher than I expected. Go check out my ranking videos. Yeah. Nanaki was a really good tournament win. And it's also always really nice when an absolutely amazing player is, recognized how well you played in something. Should Delial be banned? Yes, sir, absolutely. Who? Yeah, got him. Should Elemental be abolished? Yes, sir, immediately. But Elemental combo is broken. So is my Rainbow element that gets plus pi on everything. What clans will always have a place in your heart? Honestly, all of them. My newbie German clans, KOTR, which I created together with Sola and others, Trance Knights, Zodiac Braves, Brotherhood of Seed, but also clans I have never been a part of and been in rivalries with, T3, AVL, even smaller clans that aim to include newer players into our community and try to teach them. Whilst not being competitive, which not every clan or player needs to be, they were crucial to keep activity in a growing community up. Yeah, firmly agreed. And I didn't know Vid's clan history at all, so that's nice to hear. I think, Trance Knights, KOTR, and most of Zodiac Braves are before my time. As well as a lot of T3, actually. The T3 certainly lasted. And obviously, like AVL and Brotherhood of Seed have existed forever. Player you think is most underrated? Tough one. Vil comes to mind quickly. Quite possibly, he used to be the one who underestimated himself. Others had seen his potential. He would often just smash my face against the wall in literally any random open game, so much that I would just evade joining his games and curse if he joined mine. But in any official tournament, he was often lacking. It is nice that Carver was a weird tournament, but nice that Vialva grabbed a tournament finals there. And it's been fun to see his games in the return. He plays a very imbalanced, complex style that leads to very interesting games reliably. Who are your top 3 to 5 picks for GOAT? Mountain goat, the types of goats that climb trees. Super funny, check Google Images, and I guess goats in petting zoos. We have not had this dodge yet for this question. Well done. Next person who does it, I will yell at, but I guess the first person to do any dodge deserves to be able to dodge it. When did you start playing, and what was your favorite era? I have often tried to figure this out, but cannot say for certain. I was super young, 12 or 13 I would guess, so 20 years ago, 2002, 2003. I believe 2003 is the start of TTA, and so we might be able to work this out if Vid had played on any of the prior sites, because I think most of them... there was a site competing with TTA early. I don't know the history too well. But if like TTX was played on or something like that, that might lock in 2002 rather than 03. All eras were pretty neat, but it became more intense as I became a better player myself, competitive wise, and noticing the top tier players more. However, on a personal level, all of those times were super amazing and important to me. There would always be a sort of rival or a teacher and different ambitions. I guess a cool time was when I was considered an underdog who was slowly rising, then I quit for a while, and when I came back, all these new monsters I had never heard of had submerged. I guess emerged? And were beating everybody. Waz, Yoji, Slash, too many others. The 2008-9 additions to the site, obviously I'm one of them, so I'm biased for them. But I would sort of wonder why that happened, because there was such a pile of new talent at exactly that moment that really stuck around and didn't at other times. It's curious to me. Favorite rule sets. I'm boring here. All rules, even with and random, depending on open, closed, casual, or tourney. I hate when plus is not on, instant loss for me. Yeah, I've done a bunch of complaining about tournament rule sets without plus. I really feel like that one's mandatory. Walls, I do not rely on so much apparently. Without combo, the game becomes too dull. Same plus, alone I hate as well. Yeah, I think plus and combo are kind of the two mandatory tournament rules. One of the only time I got a top tier player in a tournament without combo on, we eventually just agreed to coin flip it. No, I think it happened twice. Once it was Great Sephiroth and we coin flipped it, and the other time I got the activity loss, despite being more active. Never forget. Yeah, boring. All rules. Or random elemental, open parentheses, combo, triple exclamation mark, close parentheses. Have you met any other TT players in person? I have met RLS, Rhinoa Love Squall, used to go by a different name later on, mostly known for her graphics, few icons at least, and just being a cute woman in the community. My brother also played, but that does not count. There was also someone from my high school who played. 2 actually. Think that's it. Sorry if I forgot someone. What is your biggest weakness as a player? My bad concentration, I suppose, and my rather stubborn playstyle. I'm not very good at adapting. I get worn out and tired quickly, and I'm not daring enough. Also, I don't act well under pressure. For instance, you got XY. Nice, you can beat him. He's weaker than you. Means game over for me. Yojimbo/Seto would often try to cheer me up, but that probably didn't help a lot. Also, I perform better when nobody is watching my game, or at least, I do not know of this. Yeah, that's interesting. I've definitely talked to a bunch of people that like it's nice to play, you know, in the middle of the night or sometime when you know you're just playing on your own. Like it feels like on your own rather than this added weight of like everyone's, you know, double like second guessing. Sorry, I couldn't think of that phrase for some reason. Everyone's second guessing all my decisions, and I think it can be nice to not have that. Though, as Vid said earlier, I think it can be really nice to have someone else there just to chat with between your moves, to chat about something other than the game. And often that person will be watching the game, but yeah. So that's the interview with Vid. Thanks again so much for doing this, and especially for doing it when I saw Vid had returned and immediately spammed him with messages asking him to do this. So I appreciate that he did and was unbothered by my obnoxious spam. And also, as my further in-depth looks at records have shown, I think Vid is one of the greats in a whole bunch of directions. One of the most interesting Occult fan writers. I currently have him 12th all-time in tournament dominance, I guess. Tournament career, tournament achievement. Though I use achievement to mean something else, so ignore the words I'm saying, but 12th all-time of tournament players. I also a just huge member, I think, of a bunch of different clans. And one of the, you know, I missed the early part, but I think a real pillar of the community around 2011, 2012. So, Hope you enjoyed this interview. I'll see you for the next one.